Welcome to the Path Less Travel podcast. This week we feature the CEO of Bashor Children's Home, Sean McCrindle. Sean, I'm excited for our conversation.
I am too. It'll be fun.
So you've been here for north of 25 years.
28.
28. Yep. You've held many titles.
Right.
You roll up your sleeves, you do it with humility, and you've got this servant leadership about you. Where does that come from?
Well, one of the things I would say is it's easier to have it here than most places. First, I'm going to say I'm biased. Everything I say about Bashor is biased. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm just biased. So we have a culture that is a servant community, a servant's heart, and when you're working with kids who have had some of the most desperate situations in life, it's pretty hard you can't do this if you don't have a servant's heart. And so I think some of that comes just from family and growing up, but really a lot of it has been kind of grown in me through the years here, through the other people I've been in contact with, and especially kids.
Yeah. So the name of this podcast is The Path Less Travel. Mm-hmm. And when you hear that and you think about and reflect upon your leadership journey, how do you resonate?
I would say I would call my journey with this the path less expected.
Should I change the title?
Well, maybe just for this one. The interesting thing is both myself and our COO, Mike Duranick, when we interviewed here at Bashor, we both believed, now vastly different time frames. He's been here for 17 years, but we both believed we would only be here a year. So we told the person we interviewed,
wow,
I'm leaving in about a year, want to be straightforward with you. And so at this point, if 1 year equals 28, I probably got another year in me.
So tell us a little bit about Bashor Children's Home.
Yeah. So, Bashor's story is an amazing one. And I like to think of Bashor as being made up of a million little stories that really make us. But, we've been around for over 100 years, and that doesn't happen by accident. At some point, John and Emmeline Bashor were sitting around their kitchen table saying, we can't have kids of our own. When it's time to do something with this farm, we want to help kids. And so at that time, that was the orphanage days. And so they committed their place to serving kids and children. And the amazing thing was that was 1923 that we became an organization. And you think about just 6 years later, the Great Depression happened. Right. So their foresight really carries through today. It's that idea of we have to be there for kids. We must say yes, we can help them. And so even today, with all the changes that happen, the what and the how you do things, those may change, but the why you do it really hasn't changed from the beginning.
So what type of services do you guys provide here, and who do you provide them for, and just what's the overall reach?
Right. Yeah. So it's always hard to summarize in a short caption what Bashor does, but I want to start off by saying we serve over 1,200 kids a year. So that's quite a few kids. The vast majority of the kids we serve are not in residential care, which is what we're known for. Generally, by people, they recognize us for residential. But the majority of our kids are served through community-based services in our alternative school system. And those are designed really to help kids stay in the community, not need higher end of care, and try to help their families have success before really intensive interventions. And then in our residential side, we have an emergency shelter care, which serves kids who are in transition from one place to another, or if they've been run away or they've kind of been kicked out by their parents, they can call a safe place or go to a safe place. We'll get the kid. And in those situations, nobody's paying for that service. It's all benevolent. And we just have to work with the parents for them to give us permission to help their kid and their family for a while. And then we have everything from substance abuse treatment to significant behavior modification that some of the kids need. And we work with very young boys who are dealing with sexually maladaptive behavior and try to get them on the right track so that they aren't hurting people in the future. We also have our newest residential program are for girls who are survivors of human trafficking. And that is a very intense program. But I'm really glad we were able to do that initially, as we were trying to get other people to do that and trying to work with them. And finally, at some point, our kids who really educated us on this and the other agencies said, you got to just jump in and do it. And so that's when we started. And then most recently, about 2.5 years ago, we opened our Abby Thomas house for those girls.
Wow. Well, you mentioned a million little stories. I'm sure there's a million little reasons on why you love working here. But tell us why you do love working here at Bashor.
Yeah. Well, the people you work with, I don't want to use like it's a military situation, but you are in the trenches with those people. The battles, the war that these kids are going through, and you're walking through with them, and how they deal with you as a staff can be challenging sometimes. And so your coworkers really make you realize, look, you're not alone doing this. It takes a big group of people. But in the end of the day, kids, I could tell stories of kids who should not have made it, who are doing so well. And I can share a quick one. This is a guy named Tim. I was just talking with our board about this last week, several years ago. Kid was here in our substance abuse treatment program. At that time, I was running that program, and I don't know what we were thinking, but every year we'd take the kids on a camping trip in Manistee, Michigan, in the middle of the national forest. And it was a crazy time, but this young man named Tim, he was a really neat kid, but really, really tough to get over the walls and barriers on. And won't go into a ton of detail on it, but basically, through that time there, he softened a little bit. There's nothing like a midnight campfire to make you open up a little. Fast forward 10 years after he left, and he calls me one day, and he said, "Hey, Sean, how you doing?" Starts talking to me like I know who it is, and I always have to say, "Okay, who is this?" And he said, "Well, it's Tim." And I'm like, I knew immediately who it was then, and so I'm like, "What's up?" And he said, "My 2 boys are old enough to go camping for the first time." And this is a kid who never told us about his spiritual journey here. And the next phrase floored me, brought me to tears. He said, "I want to take them to the place where I met God." And this is a kid who didn't have good men around him most of his life. And now he's a dad taking his 2 boys camping to where he met God. And so what I said to him is what I say to all the kids: "I'm so mad at you." And he's like, "For taking my kids camping?" And I'm like, "No, now I'm doing this 10 more years. Thanks a lot."
Well, there's loads and loads and loads and loads of stories of you and your staff pouring into people, into kids, into our youth. When you look back on people that have poured into you and have believed in you, who comes to mind, and what was that impact like?
Everybody who didn't fire me. I always tell people, if I walked in today as a youth care worker, I'd fire myself, just to be honest. No, I'd probably give myself a little bit of grace. But my journey here, quite frankly, there's been so many people that have had different impacts in different ways. Our previous CEO, Don, he was a great guy, even though he's from New York. You have to let that go.
Sure.
The fact that he can't understand 4-way stops, those sort of things. But he was a guy who had a way of seeing what was important. So if somebody had a fender bender with one of our cars, he'd laugh it off. He didn't care about the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody would go out of their way to do something special for a kid, he would do everything he could to back them. And there were times where he and I'm the kind of guy who my coaches always had to shake my face mask to get me to see it. He's the kind of guy who could shake your face mask, but you had no doubt in your mind that he was here for kids and here for people who cared about kids. And so, my journey with him and a lot of other people, I learn as much being the CEO from people I supervise and other people here today as I did from the people who supervised me before. We have people who will challenge us here, challenge our thinking, and that's important. If you don't have that as a CEO, you're in a very risky situation.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. Surrounding your people, surrounding you with people that will deliver truth and love.
Yeah.
How do you create a culture like that just is built on trust?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I can say is in our group, we have a lot of depth in this agency. And I always tell our board, we got a ton of depth. If I get hit by a bus, we're fine. If Mike gets hit by a bus, we're less fine, but we're still fine. But we have people who have stayed here for a long time because it's their personal mission. The great thing about that is if you can find a way in your leadership to let people own the portion that they're working.
Right.
And give them the opportunity to really make it personally theirs, they'll fight for it in a way that's good. And if you can also have a group of people who get siloing off as not good, then you have growth that happens faster than you can keep up with as the exec. And most of the time, I'm in the position of saying, okay, we got all these things you guys want to do with kids, all these things you want to grow. We have to figure out what we can do well and not overextend ourselves so we start to fall down. And so I really think in the leadership role, you're blessed if your people own where they're at. They're not afraid to disrupt the status quo or just say, because we've always done it, and always are focused on the most important thing, kids. And for us, that's why our organizational chart's upside down. In our agency, kids and families are at the top, the placing agency's next, our direct care staff, and then down to me and our board at the bottom of our org chart. And it's not always perfect, but it always reminds us, I am here to cheer those people on, get the resources they need so that we can do whatever kids need when they need it.
So with that being said, as you're talking about building culture, building trust within the individuals within the organization, you've got to have hard conversations.
Yeah.
How do you approach a crucial conversation? Do you have a framework in place? How do you do it?
Yeah, I can tell you early in my career, that was probably one of the most challenging things. How do I have these difficult, challenging conversations? And then I realized at some point, there's two things. It's a very easy conversation if you believe that person shouldn't be here or shouldn't be with kids. It's about 5 minutes. We're done. Right. I don't need to be mean to them. I don't need to be mad. I'm just done. If it's somebody else, I will push as hard as I can without breaking their spirit because I believe in them to do the right thing. And that over time has made me, I have very low stress on difficult conversations because I've seen far more of them come out well than the other way. I can honestly say I've also seen when people hesitate on that stuff that it just snowballs and gets worse.
Right.
And so when we have to have a difficult conversation, I remember this is a person who truly cares about these kids because the other people I deal with fast. And if that's the case, then my goal is to get them to understand, look, I'm not moving the line. We have a plumb line on how we're doing this, but I believe in you and let's work towards getting it to where it needs to be. And people come around to that and they can see if you genuinely believe that or not. There's nothing better than following up 3, 4, 5, 6 months later and say, I see what you're doing.
And I'm sure it's taken you some time to learn how to approach them in that position.
Yeah.
From that posture. What about a failure of yours or a risk that you've taken in the past? You're speaking tons of wisdom, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But let's point to a situation in which you failed or you took a risk, and what was that impact like? What'd you learn?
Yeah, well, I can tell you something I will tell you one from early when I was a director early on, and this was something that was meant to be good. But then I realized later you can't really do things that way. So we had a staff member who was amazing. I mean, this guy was so good with kids. And I was like, this guy needs to be doing group therapy. I mean, he is and he hadn't completed his degree. And so at some point this is where Don also got to have a more straightforward conversation with me afterwards. So I won't use the staff member's name, but I looked at him and I said, you need to get your degree. you're wasting your time and you're making it so these kids don't have as good of a resource as they need. And so if you don't get back in and get your degree, I'm firing you. So that technically is not an appropriate thing to do. So I realized walking away and told Don what I did. He said, "You can't do that, you idiot." I don't know if he probably did call me an idiot because I deserved it. And then he coached me and said, "Look, you could still get it across with this guy without threatening to fire him." Long story short, that guy got his degree, did a bunch of amazing things, moved on to other career stuff, and I would do it differently. But if it wouldn't have resulted in that, I would take that risk again. When it comes to stuff with kids, that's where you have to say, okay, what risks will I not take? And there's a lot of them because these kids have a lot that come with them. You can't understand everything that's going on in their heads, but you do have to say, I can't put a kid in a bad situation. And so there have been times where I've been involved with some things with kids, and as we've done this stuff, or as people have been doing this stuff, we realized, okay, it can be something as little as taking a trip somewhere or whatever. And there have been times where we've made a decision, we want to get these kids this experience, but then we took them somewhere and it resulted in something that wasn't good for a kid, like a place that was too close to their hometown. They couldn't fight the urge to run away or whatever. And so I've had those failures throughout time. And so there's always this balance of how do we give these kids as much normalcy as we can and as many good experiences as we can without putting them in a bad situation.
You guys are impacting lives moment by moment, day by day. And there's a lot of things to be proud of and reflect upon. And the question that I have for you is, what's something that you're most proud of here at Bashor?
I would say that the biggest thing I'm proud of is our culture. There's no doubt in my mind about that. There are tons of little things that we've done, but our culture has helped us to amazingly. We have a 1/3 of the turnover rate of most agencies like ours throughout the state, in looking at us compared to the state association numbers. And that, I know that doesn't happen by accident, but because those people are here, our culture stays. And when you have a good culture that stays, when you have bad culture, you got to move it out. But when you have a good culture that stays, you can stretch yourself to do things with kids you couldn't otherwise. And the thing with our culture is, I'm not humble when it comes to our people. I know that I feel fortunate in the things that I've been involved in, but our culture is a people who have humility. They are very focused on when kids have wins, celebrating it, but not making it that we did it. We are here to open doors that kids have to walk through. They got to choose it. And so having a culture of people who this is their personal mission, every kid who stands in front of them, they're trying to look at, like, if this was my kid, how would I want somebody to treat them? And then doing everything they can to open doors so these kids can see there's another way to life, another path to life, so that they can be taking their two boys camping someday.
Well, you've been the CEO here since March of 2021.
That's right.
Okay. And when you're leading an organization, you're not done learning, you're not done growing, right?
Yeah.
What are some things that you're working on right now to be a better Sean 12 months from now, 24 months from now?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'll do is I'll take you back to the beginning of my being the new CEO, which is interesting because so you come in and I don't care that I'd been here 20 some years, you make mistakes. And one of the things I would definitely look backwards at and say, I wish I would have had a little more wisdom, was our agency was doing really well at that time. So I took over an agency that was doing really well. Yeah. However, I was really excited about all these ideas and plans I had in place. And I came in wanting to run all those plans at 100 miles an hour. And looking back at that, I realized that people were going like, do you think we're not doing good? You know, and I would have said to everybody, I'm going to have a million ideas. Just know it's because you're amazing, rather than going like, we got to go on this. And as I look at it today, one of the things that's the hardest still for me to fight is I tend to be a visionary. That's a normal thing. But we have a whole group of visionaries here. I mean, even our people who that's not their natural personality, they're so invested in what they're doing. They're always thinking, what can we grow?
Right.
So for me, a big part of that comes back to the servant leadership and going, okay, how do I find a way for those people to bring all that stuff out and then be able to form that into, okay, here's our path we're going, rather than I'm going to dictate the path and all that stuff. And so for me, a lot of that comes down to, I like reading historical books on, especially like old military kind of books about biographies about individuals and things like that, because a lot of times what you find in that is the people who are really successful may have been bold and brash and all that, but they also had a way of making sure that their teams were together. And then also, one of the things is being married to a very smart woman who is a better arguer than you is really good to help humble you and go like, I might not have answers to all this stuff. So as I'm trying to get myself in the right spot, another thing is when we do my eval, when the board does my eval, we do a 360-degree evaluation. So I get the sense of what they're doing, the people I supervise, and some other people. And we do a lot of, not a lot of surveys, but staff surveys that give us important information. And I use those really heavily to say, where are we at? And are we ready for some next big step? But some of the biggest stuff that guides me and where I'm going continues to be our mission, vision, values, and purpose statements. We don't have half measure ones. We have things to say like we're going to do all the good we can in all the ways we can and all the means we can at all the times we can for as long as we can with anybody we can. Well, if I'm having a day where I'm going, I don't know, I got it in me so much, I pull that thing out and say, where in there does it give me permission to not go full out? And so I use our mission, our vision, values is a personal motivator for me, not just in looking at our agency's direction, but my daily direction.
I don't know what the count is on the number of times you've used the word we in this conversation. You use we a lot. Yeah. And it appears though you've surrounded yourself with people in your life that are helping you become a better version of you. Mm-hmm. Who are those individuals, mentors along the way, people that have helped just shape and mold you to where you're at?
Yeah, man. Along my direction, one of the things I want to say about the we thing is, so we have a great board member. His name's John Worry. He's part of the owners of Fabric Services. And one of the things he said to me when we were bringing in program people to talk to our board and do mission moments is he said, every person who's come in here says we. Like he noticed that, he's a really smart guy. And he said, that tells me where you guys are. So I'm not the only person. If you talk to anybody here, we will be what you hear the most. And that's important. Growing up, I had a great dad. He's a firefighter, good guy. He passed away several years ago, but I think being around him, he had a kind of a hard structure with things, but he also taught me a lot about being a man. I have a great brother who is older than me, and despite me ending up in the emergency room a million times, most of the time it was us having fun. And coaches. So I have had the benefit of having some great coaches in life. And one of my coaches in high school, when I was playing football, I usually played offense all the way through, and he was a defensive coach, and he wanted me to come on and play defense. And so it was my senior year was a great experience because he was the kind of guy who would work me until I was sick and then made me want to get right back at it. And those are the kind of people. He had a way of doing like, I'm going to push you because I believe in you. And that's where some of that carries into those conversations. And most all of the men I run into here somehow mentor me, whatever position they're in. I mean, we've got some long timers, Nick Cossey and some other guys here who are direct care staff, have been for a long time, and I'm going to retire their jerseys when they leave because they probably taught me more. They had definitely have taught me more than I've taught them. And then obviously Don, our past CEO, had a huge impact on me and lots of other people. And one of the things each year I do is I find one of those guys from my past who's invested, and I've had lots of great women who have invested in me too, but looking at my guy mentors, and I'll just send them a card with a silver ounce that just talks about how they've refined me, so I don't forget those people did stuff they didn't have to do. I think of all those people who are big brothers, big sisters, bigs, and things like that, and I think about our donors. Those people don't have to do what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're choosing to. So I better value that. And the good news is on the women's side of things, I got a mom who's just about 5 foot, but you have to call her 5 foot. She's always let me and my brother know. It didn't matter how big we got, she could take us down. And also, for a long time, I had a great program director here, Susie. She had great management experience. But she taught me a lot about how to be a leader because she was actually better at management than I was. And so I would do something and she'd come in and say, yeah, you just scared everybody in the room. Don't do that. Like she was the kind of person who could really guide me. So if I put a list, it would be an entire journal full of people. Yeah. I mean, I am very fortunate that way.
Well, I've got one final question for you. Mm-hmm. It's a question that I wrap every interview up with. And it's what's one of the kindest things someone has done for you, whether it be here at Bashor, in your personal life? Mm-hmm. What comes to mind?
Well, easily the kindest thing somebody's done to me is Shelly married me. Like that. That was a huge sacrifice for her. Yes. I mean, she truly has had the biggest impact in my life. Outside of my immediate family, I've had people open doors for my kids. And there is nothing like somebody opening a door for your kid to have an opportunity they wouldn't have otherwise had. And I have lots of those. One happens to be a crazy thing about my son is a bagpiper, and somebody opened a door for him to begin learning how to play bagpipes when he was 10 years old. And it set him on this crazy journey of opportunities that he now sees as, how did that even happen? And he sees it as like gifts from God. And when people do that for your kids, and that's why when people do nice things for our kids here, like my heart is truly touched, because if somebody can open a door for somebody that they can't open themselves, that person still has to walk through it. But if they walk through it, they're not afraid of walking through other ones, and that makes a huge difference.
Well, what final thoughts do you have that you'd want to share as it pertains to leadership in general, or just anything that you'd like to communicate about Bashor before we wrap up?
Yeah. Well, I would definitely say I'll save the leadership stuff. I think there's so many people out there who are so much better than me at general leadership. But when it comes to leadership, that old saying, you got to get the right people on the bus. There is no joke in that. With the right people, you can really drive a bus fast and still be pretty safe. When it comes to Bashor, I said it. I already told you that I'm biased. I can't imagine working anywhere else. One time I was having a conversation with a guy, and he said, nonprofits are bad at business. And he did it just to see how I'd react. And I said, yeah, and the good ones are bad on purpose. And he looked at me funny, and I look at it this way. This is why it's so fun to have a nonprofit. There's lots of hard things, but I look at it this way. If you had a business where you were building buildings and somebody came in and they were going to throw a bunch of money at a project, and you could go, man, we got some really good people who can do some of this architect stuff, but really this agency B or company B, they would build a really good one. And they said, hey, rather than you give us the money, we're going to partner with them, give them our best people, work together on this thing. You give them the money for this thing, and it's going to be the best building ever. And you don't even have to care about the money. That's the difference. So being bad at business means you still watch your bottom line, you're good stewards, you do all that stuff. But when it comes down to it, we had a situation here several years ago where we got to go to our board and say, we have a kid who's in a desperate situation, probably the most desperate situation in the state. If we help her, we're gonna lose $30,000 a month. And we had a board member still on our board today who pointed to our mission, vision, values, and he said, where does it say on there, except unless it's too hard or it costs too much? So we took that kid in. That is bad business, losing $30,000 a month on purpose. But the good mission of it is, if we didn't help that girl today, we would not have our survivors program and a lot of other intensive girls programs. She taught us so much. So it was a huge loss of money that resulted in a huge win for kids. And that's what Bashor is.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. It was outstanding to hear a little bit more about Bashor, your leadership journey, and then just how you clearly lead with this grit, this humility, and service. So thank you again for doing this, Sean.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of the Path Less Travel podcast with the CEO of Bashor Children's Home, Sean McCrindle. Until next week, have a great day.